You want to start your HTML document with doctype HTML. This allows your browser to interpret everything else that you type here as HTML5. Now, your basic HTML document always starts with HTML tag. And in most cases, when building out your HTML structure, you usually have to close the tags that you open. And you have to open them and close in the same order. So for example, if I have the head tag here, I also have to close it with a /. And if I have another tag like title here, I also have to close it. So again, you close it with an equivalent tag only with a /. And this crash course text will actually go into the tab of your web page. So as you can see here, it says crash course, and that's exactly the text we have here. So the next thing you want to learn is the body tag, and you open and close it just like any other tag so far using the /. Whatever you type in the body is actually going to be displayed in your web page. But let's say we have an image tag, yellow eraser. In HTML, you use the image tag with the source attribute to display an image on the screen. And usually this file is a location of that picture, either on your web server or somewhere online. You could actually type a URL that starts with an HTTP or HTTPS. But in this case, I'm using a simple file name. Now, in order for the image to actually appear, you have to make sure that this file exists in the same folder together with this HTML file. So I've done that before I started recording this tutorial. I placed this image into the same folder with this file. As you can see, some of the tags we don't have to close. They are called self-closing tags. So you can type as many as you want, and that will replicate that element. So another example of a self-closing tag is an input tag, text, value, hello. Not all HTML elements need a closing tag. That's something you're going to learn to understand intuitively as you learn more about HTML. So for structure, you always have to close them. But some of the tags that are standalone tags, like image and input tags, are called self-closing tags. And this, by the way, is a comment. So you can use multi-line comments in HTML to block out the HTML code, and it's not going to be visible on the screen anymore. And remove the comment, and that stuff appears again. So before we move forward, I just want to mention that inside the head tag, you only add additional information about your site. So later in this tutorial, I'll show you how to add your own CSS and JavaScript, and usually CSS and JavaScript go into the head tag. You can use them in some other places, and we'll take a look at that later in this tutorial as well. But just know that the head tag is here to provide additional information about your page. So we have things like meta tag, content, keywords, and value, HTML, crash course. And it's a self-closing tag, so you don't have to close it with another one. There's also content description, value. This is my HTML crash course. Okay, so again, inside the head, it's just a bunch of additional information about your site. It's not really anything visible on the screen. That's what you will use the body tag for. Now, I'm not going to go in much depth on our next subject, but it's kind of important, especially if you're a content creator. Sometimes you want your page to be displayed with an image when it's posted on social media. So for example, here's my React hooks tutorial. And when I post this link on Twitter, I get this image displayed automatically. All of that can be specified also within the head tag, remember, because it's just for the information about our page. So according to Twitter, it's called Twitter card, and it comes with a set of these special tags that you place in the head tag. You have card, site, creator, title, description, and image. And you fill out all of these values here in the content attributes. The card needs to say summary large image with underscore. The site is a Twitter username. Creator is also username. The title is the title of your card. And the same for description. And you specify the URL to the image. Just make sure that your header image is 800 by 418, which is the ideal size for a Twitter card image. But it doesn't have to be that size. So the rest of this tutorial is going to be about what we can do in the body tag. So we're going to explore a bunch of different HTML tags. They're all pretty simple, but it's important to understand them. To save time, I'm not going to actually type these HTML tags by hand. I'm just going to copy them directly into HTML. So in HTML, you have 6 different title tags, and they look like this. Basically, you use H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, and H6. Most sites usually use all the way down to H3. Sometimes some sites might use H4, and almost no sites ever use H5 and H6. This is very rare. The H1 tag is usually here to provide the main title for your page. After that, usually you have your article, right? So this, whatever the content of your article is, goes in there. And usually you use the paragraph tag to create paragraphs of text. So you would probably say something like, welcome to my HTML crash course. This is my second paragraph, and so on. So you build out your article, usually using the paragraph tags in combination with H1, and if you need an extra header, which is slightly smaller, subheader, create it using the H2 tag. You will see that you basically build out your article content using the header and the paragraph tags. This is a really plain looking site, but don't worry about CSS or stuff like that. We'll cover that later. For now, just know that HTML is actually a structure, which means you nest these tags within each other and you build out the structure of your site. And later, using CSS, you can add whatever you want. For example, style, padding, border, 20px, solid red. Let's see what happens. So you'll use CSS to style your structure that you created with all these HTML tags. Of course, this is just a basic example. It doesn't really do much to the style of the page, but you get the idea. CSS is going to add some colors and layout modifications and stuff like that. But we're going to gradually cover more of that as we move forward in this tutorial. Now here, I purposely made a mistake to demonstrate a point. When I created these paragraph tags, I purposely forgot to close them using the /. But as you can see, HTML was rendered correctly. So how come, even though I provided wrong HTML, it still got rendered accurately within our window? Well, HTML will actually try to correct your code, and I could even remove these tags completely. And here I'm refreshing the page, but nothing is actually changing. So what happens is that the browser HTML engine will parse your HTML and will automatically close your tags, even if you don't specify them. Now, that doesn't mean that it's a good practice to follow. So you should always open and close your tags. But again, if you don't do that, HTML will try to do that for you. But it doesn't mean that you're writing correct code. So always try to close your tags anyway. You also have some other self-closing tags. For example, if you want to add some space, you can add a line break it's going to add some extra space, usually in the amount of one paragraph. But you can continue adding these BR tags and just expand on that space. You can also use the HR tag, which is going to add a horizontal line, and sometimes you can use this to separate different parts of your article. It's not really used a lot anymore, but it's nice to know that it's there. It's really an ancient tag from probably the 90s that we have. It's not used a lot, so it would be hard to find an actual use case for this. There's this other thing that's kind of important that I'm going to demonstrate here, and it's HTML attributes. So for example, the body tag has a unique attribute on load, and it takes some JavaScript. So alert is a JavaScript function, and I can pass the argument hello, and if I refresh the page, I'll get this alert message with this text that we typed, and then the page will load. So what happens is that the onload is an event that is triggered when all of the media on the page has finished loading. Toward the end of this tutorial, I'll show you 2 entry points for your web application, but for now just know that these additional attributes are sometimes very important, and attributes do come in many different flavors. There's a style attribute for which we've already seen for specifying additional CSS to an element. So in this case, I applied some style to H1, and let's see what happens. You can see that we changed its background to black. If you use color white, let's remove this actually, so we don't get an alert again. You can see that we can change color of an HTML by applying the style attribute with some CSS properties like background and color, some of the basic ones. I'm going to cover CSS in more complete detail in a CSS crash course that's coming up after this tutorial. We still have a lot to do as far as just the HTML goes. So one of the things you should probably start thinking about at this point is the inline and blocking elements. So I'm going to rewrite this to inline and blocking elements. So for example, instead of using paragraph, we can use a span. Let's just create this experiment where we have a bunch of spans. You will see that they are all aligned inline, one after another. So there's no line break. So let's create horizontal line break. But if I use a different tag, so instead of a span, I'm going to use a div. You will see the difference. If I refresh, you will see that now our elements are aligning from top to bottom. So if I look at one of these blocking elements in Chrome Development Console, you will see that the user agent style sheet is automatically set to display block. And if I actually apply this display block to my inline elements, all of them, and refresh the page, you will see that now they have also become blocking. It's just by default, they have a style of inline. And you can actually do the same thing with blocking elements, and it's totally open for you to rewrite the default user agent style sheet. If I rewrite this to style inline, you will see that the blocking elements will be also aligned with inline. So using these 2 distinct types of CSS styles, you can decide which type of element you want to use in which situation. And usually you use the inline styles to create style around some text. So as you can see, it will fall right in line with all this text. It's not going to create any line breaks. But the blocking elements like div or later we'll take a look at HTML5. Most developers just use the divs, but the semantic tags like section are also very important. Or it can be article. You'll see that these tags also are all blocking. So you'll just have to memorize eventually which tags are blocking and which ones are inline. And basically what you need to know is that the blocking elements are usually used for creating an actual layout. They're used for blocking out different parts of your site, like navigation, sidebars, footers, and all stuff like that. But inline elements like span are used in the middle of some text. Some of the other automatically inline elements are the B tag, which is going to make this text bold. Let's refresh that. You will see that this text has become bold. So the B tag is an inline element that also, just like span, it integrates into the text. So I'm going to show you some of the other basic tags in HTML, and then we're going to go forward to colors, forms, tables, and lists, and some other things. So again, here we have the inline bold text. Also, the I tag is also an inline tag for creating this slanted text, which is like a italic or italicized text. And the span, it doesn't really do anything as far as any style, but you can use the style attribute, let's say, to paint it red, and this CSS will be applied to this span of text. Now, there's another tag that is very commonly used as the pre-format. Code appears exactly as it's typed with all spaces preserved. And again, we need to close it. So let's see what happens here. Pre-formatting tag pre is actually going to preserve all the white space. This is very useful when you have some computer code or like a printed out letter or something like that. So I'm going to create a break. A lot of the time you might want to use the code. The code tag is here for specifically things like showing the computer code, like JavaScript, for example. And so if you do something like this, console log is a JavaScript function. But you will see that it's inline. So what you might want to sometimes do is wrap those code blocks with the pre-formatting. And as you can see, it will format it and also preserve the space. You probably shouldn't spend that much time on it, but there's also a tag called sample, and it's very similar to code. But this sample tag is used for displaying the sample output of a program. So for example, if you run this code and you want to show in your article the output, it's just going to display this. The thing that unifies all of these tags here is that they all also use monospace font. So monospace font is a font where each letter or character is the same width as any other character. So it's no longer the default text here. But as you can see, they all support this coding format, whether it's pre-formatted text, whether it's the code element, or if it's the sample code. So they all share the same monospace text by default. To create a hyperlink, you will use the A tag. So give it some title. Traditionally, this text here is called anchor text or hyperlink text. This is called the anchor tag. So by itself, it does not really create a hyperlink. In order to turn this element into an actual link, you will use href attribute and put the actual address of the website. Now, if you refresh, you'll see that there's an underline. So if you click on this link, you will actually go to Google. Additionally, you can specify title attribute, Google's homepage. And when you do that and you move your mouse over the link, you will see that pop up as this small note. So this is useful for things like search engine optimizations. And also another thing you can do is open this link in a new tab. So in order to do that, you have to specify the target attribute and use the value of underscore new, or it can actually be underscore blank, which will do the same thing. So let's refresh this and click on this, and you will see Google opens in a new tab every time I click on it. Now, there's not much else you can say about hyperlinks. Maybe by using rel and no opener, you disallow creating a new browsing context. I'm not going to go much into detail on this, but it kind of makes your hyperlinks more secure. For more information, you can just Google more about this attribute and value. And finally, adding no index here will tell search engines like Google not to index the page that you're pointing to, which basically means not to include it in search results. In a similar way, no follow tells Google search not to rank that link for search engine results. Now, in the next part, I'm going to show you how to create lists. And basically in HTML, we have unordered lists and ordered lists. Unordered lists have this bullet point in the shape of a circle, and ordered lists start with a digit, and they automatically increase the more items you add to the list. The unordered list is created using the UL tag, and then for the items, you just specify as many LI tags as you want. And the same thing for ordered lists, except they are created using the OL element. Now, you can nest multiple lists within other lists. So just basically open another UL or OL tag inside another item and just add more items to them. And they also have the ability to change what you want this small icon to look like. So they have square, circle, and some other ones. And really, basically, that's all there is to lists. They will be automatically organized as you add more items. Now, I'll quickly go over tables because they are really very basic to create. So to create a table, you use the table tag. And for each row, you use the tr tag. And usually the very first row will use a th, which stands for header. And that will automatically change your user agent CSS to bold text on the header element. For the rest of the elements, you should probably use just the td tag. So you open a new row and you start with a td, and then you type your rows within each nested td tag. And you just continue doing that and build out your table. The only thing you should probably know about tables is that they have a row span attribute, and let's say if you set it to 3, this United States row will stretch for 3 rows instead of just 1 like the rest of them. And you also have call span, which, let's say if we set it to 2, it will stretch these rows across the entire 2 columns that we have. Now if you change that to 1, you will not really see much change here, but each row will stretch the amount of columns specified in call span attribute. And tables are pretty basic, and there's really not much else to say about them. The only other thing I would add is that I created some CSS here to make a distinction between different rows, and I used nth child selector with even value. So because I used the value of even, which was applied to the each tr tag, it painted the entire table into this zebra pattern. Yeah, we can change this to another color like red, and you'll see that it's going to change all that to red. HTML forms start with a form tag, and you have an action attribute and target for the script that you want to execute. And the action attribute can be either get or post, usually in most cases. And then you fill out the content of the form, which usually consists with a bunch of input elements. And each of those input elements have a type attribute So here, for example, we have a basic text input, and the placeholder is the value that will be displayed by default in that input container, and the value will actually become that value. So here, if I refreshed, you can overwrite this default value. The placeholder is only a suggestion. It's not really considered to be part of the value itself. Now, in the same way, we have an email here. And for email, you might also add a name like email. And again, we have the placeholder attribute here saying that this field is for email addresses and the value is blank, but you can put something here by default, but usually email address is something that's filled out by the user. Now, there's a special type hidden for input fields is, for example, you want to pass together with your form a value like a token or some kind of a unique value that should not be visible on the form itself, but you still want to pass it together with all of this other information. In that case, you will use type hidden, and then you use the variable name token, and the value of that variable is going to be typed here. Now, the next input element is a text area, which has its own element tag. It has calls and rows for determining the size of the text area. You will usually assign the ID, so you can select it from JavaScript by some sort of a unique ID. Here's the body of the text area, which is, by the way, not a self-closing tag. You always have to close a text area with another tag, unlike the input tags, which are standalone tags. Now, after this, you probably want to learn how the select elements work, which are also part of the HTML form. And the select elements also have options, and they are just nested within the select tag. And if you want to use a select attribute, this will actually create, select the default value, even though it's the second one, because it's selected here, it's going to be the default value. Now, if you remove that and refresh the page, it has changed to red because it's the first one. So by default, the default value is the first one. Now I have checkboxes, which is created by input type checkbox. And you specify the value in the value attribute. Again, you can check them by default by using the checked attribute. And then you simply type the text that follows after them, and they can be clicked on and selected. Then we have type checkbox, which is basically exactly the same example as the previous one, except with labels. So when you use a label, you have to assign an ID to the checkbox, and then when you create a label, you use that ID in the for attribute. So this A here comes from the ID name of this checkbox. And so inside this label is just a text of what that checkbox is for. And what the label does is you can actually select the checkbox by clicking on the label instead of just the checkbox itself. So these labels create a better user experience for selecting checkboxes. And as you can see in the previous example, we did not use a label, so you can't select them by clicking on their text, but labels allow you to do that from here. Forms can also have radio buttons, which is input type radio, and the value will be the value of that each radio button. By default, they're not grouped, so what that basically means is that you can select them like checkboxes, and you will not be able to select an individual radio button unless you group them. And in order to group radio buttons, simply assign the same name to the name attribute of each radio button that you want to group. So all of these radio buttons are in the colors group. You can click on them and you will see that only one radio button will be selected at a time from that group. And finally, we have the submit form. You filled out all of this information in the form. You selected some items here. You typed some text and your name or email. It could be a login form, so you would take a password. By the way, password is actually also would be typed here, and there's actually a special type password for this. And what happens is that passwords will hide your value as you type it, and it will be displayed as those bullet points. And so now that you want to submit this form, you create a submit button, and it's an input element of type submit. And when you do that, this input element converts automatically into a button with whatever value you specify here. It's going to be displayed here. And if you click on that button, we're going to go to a file that doesn't actually exist, that's specified in the target. Again, this is just a HTML tutorial, so I'm not going to show you how to submit actual files to a server-side script. But basically, this is the page that we specify here that will be opened when we click on the submit button. And another type of a submit button, and here I created a separate form, is the upload a file. To upload a file, you use the form tag, you specify the destination script, and inside this form you have two input tags. One of them is type file and another one is type submit. So when you click on choose file button produced by this, you will choose a file from your file system, and then you click on the upload, and it's going to trigger this script specified in the action attribute of the form. Now, this script will be actually responsible for processing this file, and it will be sent to the server side, and on your server you will process that within this file, which is completely different from HTML. This could be a JavaScript server or a PHP server. It doesn't really matter how you implement that, but on the front end, this form submits the file to the server side. So the next thing is kind of important, even though I don't really see it a lot in tutorials, like ever, and it's HTML entities. So we have named entities. Like, for example, I'm going to put them all into paragraph tags. For example, we have the entity, and entities start with an end character. So if you type copy, and it's very important to end them in a semicolon, otherwise it's not going to register. So start with and, then type the name of the entity and end it with a semicolon. So let's say 2027. And I'm going to refresh this. And you'll see that this copy entity created the copyright character. And there's a whole bunch of them. Like they have phone, and it's going to embed this telephone icon. So they have hundreds of these HTML entities, and most of them are pretty much useless. You don't really need them. But the ones that you might want to use is a very important one is LT, let's say tag, and GT. So what happens here, what if you want to display visually some tag in your article? Because you are in HTML document, actually typing these brackets will activate some kind of a tag, right? But the LT and GT HTML entity, they will actually create them visually without actually doing anything. So here's the paragraph tag, is the paragraph tag. And this way you can use the brackets without actually triggering them into actually rendering that element. This might sound like a simple thing at first, but it becomes much more important when you get into JavaScript. For example, returning JSON objects with HTML tags, which you don't need to render, but you want to display them visually. And the same actually goes much more important when it comes to JSON objects. Again, I'll explain them later in one of my JavaScript tutorials. But basically, you should start being aware of the HTML entities quote, which is a double quote. Double quotes are super important when you get into JavaScript and mix it together with HTML, because again, for the same reason, sometimes you have like double quotes, but inside that text you also have double quotes. And this creates a conflict. Like JavaScript no longer knows whether you're trying to close this quote or this is just a quote inside another quote. You can also use single quotes when you have the main text using double quotes, but in many situations that you will have a deeper understanding of later, this is a more proper way of doing it. So, and of course there's single quote, but you'll use the apostrophe single quote. So let's go ahead and display that. So that's how you would use some HTML entities to create some of these important characters. And again, you'll see them a lot when working with things like JSON, returning some information from a database, and a lot of the time this text includes these characters and they can break your HTML or the rest of your JavaScript program. Now, in the next part of this tutorial, I'm going to show you HTML colors. I'm not going to type them all out by hand like previous examples, so I'm just going to put it all here. Basically, you have your built-in named colors in HTML. You will use the style attribute. Colors are assigned to HTML elements through CSS, so there's no such thing as HTML colors actually. HTML defines some basic built-in names like yellow, orange, red, purple, blue, green, silver, gray, black, and a whole bunch of others as well. You will see that we painted the background of these blocking elements, taking up all of their blocking space. Now, there's also something called X11 color names, and they are standardized by SVG 1.0 and CSS 3. So these colors have more elaborate names, like tomato is going to create this similar to Patreon brand color. Then we have cornflower blue, and we have gold, indigo, and sienna. And so these are kind of more unique colors than compared to the basic set of some of the primary colors. And they're called X11. So now there's a whole bunch of them. If you want to take a look at all of them, you have to just go and Google them and figure out all of the other names. There's about 200 of them or so. And finally, some of the most flexible functions that we have in HTML is the rgb function. Again, it's also CSS, so you assign it to background or color property using the style attribute. Basically, rgb functions have 3 arguments, one for the red channel, the green channel, and blue. And using these different channels, you can create pretty much any color that you want. Here I have some examples. Note that the values range from 0 to 255, which gives you 256 different values. So RGB 25500 is going to be red because the red channel is maxed out with 255. Then we have the green channel and the blue channel. And you can combine different numbers here. So let me just change that to some random. No, not much change here. Maybe 150. So you can see it's slightly changing. There's a whole bunch of them there. The combinations that you can achieve. Obviously, black will be all zeros, and white will be all 225, all 255 on all channels. So like here. And we also have rgba, which is the same thing, except with the alpha channel. The alpha channel can be 0.0 to 1.0. So any value in between this range is going to work, like 0.2. So really this is just a red color, but because the alpha channel is 0.2, it turns into pink, because in the background we have white, and so it kind of blends in through this alpha channel with the background. Now, finally, this is probably some of the most commonly used color codes using the hexadecimal numeric system. And it goes similar to RGB, but in hexadecimal, you get digits from 0 to F. So basically, this would be 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 16. And the format is 2 letters for the R, the red channel, 2 letters for green, and 2 letters for blue. So what happens is you use this hexadecimal numeric system to combine into this 6-character value. And using these different values, you can also, in a similar way to RGB, in decimal numeric system, you can create colors in hexadecimal system. So it just takes playing around and seeing how all of this works. All zeros, again, will be black, and all F's will be white. And finally, we also have hexadecimal value for colors with the alpha channel, which is just like this, except there's an additional extra for alpha channel. And again, they're also using the hexadecimal 0 to 15 or 16 digits here, represented by letters. And just to demonstrate here, all of them are black, but we only change the alpha to something else. And as you can see, gradually we change that color to be more transparent. So that's pretty much all there is to colors. You basically just use CSS and apply them through some property like background or color or some other one. In HTML and JavaScript, you have something called the document object model. Basically, whenever you type a new tag here, you're going to get something like this. So as you can see, we just attached an HTML object to the main document object. So let's see what happens if we continue building out our layout. So let's add a head tag and a body tag. So let's see what that looks like in the document object model. Now we have these 2 tags attached to HTML, which is sometimes known as the root object. So now we have these 2 elements there. Let's continue building out just to see what happens in the document object model. Let's say we have h1 with some title text. Actually, let's just put in the h1 like this. Now we have h1 attached, so if we type title text in here, it's going to be attached as a node of this h1, and it's going to be tied to this h1 element. So that we can do something like add a paragraph, say hello, and here we're going to get something like this. So you continue building out your HTML, and under the hood in JavaScript engine, this document object model continues building out as well. So let's go ahead and add some things here, maybe the title tag. And we can say, let's say crash course title. And now we just attach the title tag to the head. So another thing we can do is the meta tag. It's a self-closing tag. It's going to be attached to the head because now they're both in the head. The document object model also stores all of your attributes. So for example, if we have here keywords specified using the name attribute and the value of keywords specified using the content attribute, you're going to get something like this. So these attributes also get attached to each object if that object has them. And also the values of these attributes will be attached as a text string, just like we have it here over there. So why are we doing all this? Well, basically by thinking about your elements as a document object model instead of just the HTML tags, this allows you to use JavaScript in order to add, edit, and otherwise manipulate these objects in real time from your JavaScript program. So for example, you can select a paragraph tag using the query selector in JavaScript, which goes in the head tag, assign it to a variable, and call the remove method. That will completely remove the hello object from the document object model representation of your site. And it will be basically the same thing as if that element doesn't even exist in your web page. Now, there's a whole bunch of these different methods attached to the document object and the elements that these types of functions return. They allow you to add your own elements to the DOM or edit their text inside the title and a bunch of others. But I'm not going to go into DOM methods in this tutorial. I will probably just make a separate tutorial just for that because it's much more complex. And I just wanted to keep this tutorial to basic HTML. So how would something like this actually work? I'm going to comment out this temporarily and place this back in here. So let's say we actually have this page with this HTML. Now, if you run this code actually directly from the script tags, you will see nothing's going to happen. We're not actually removing the hello tag. That's because when the page loads, you get all these elements, then the JavaScript executes, but this part hasn't loaded yet. And so when we try to select the p paragraph tag, it's not even loaded into the browser yet, because the way the tags load into the browser are gradually from top to bottom. So we get to this point, and your JavaScript executes immediately as soon as it's downloaded. So at this point, this HTML doesn't exist yet as the browser continues to parse. So in order to prevent that from happening, in JavaScript, there's a special event that's being generated that will execute soon as all of the DOM elements are finished downloading in the browser. And that event is called DOM content loaded. In order to capture that event and actually execute something when it happens, we have to use the document object and add event listener function, and then type DOM content loaded. And then we have to provide a function that looks like this. Don't worry about if you don't understand exactly what this syntax means. It's basically an arrow function. To be more specific, it's an event callback function, but I'll explain more about that in my JavaScript crash course. But basically, you want to put everything in here because now we're going to execute this code only once we have the entire DOM, all of these elements downloaded into the browser. And now if I refresh the page, you will see that hello actually disappeared. So this function has actually executed. So this program entry point allows you to use JavaScript to manipulate all of these elements in the body. Some other things you can do is document. You don't have to use the selector all the time. The body, for example, this object already exists automatically on the document object. So if you do something like apply some CSS to it, background black, and refresh the page, we don't really need this one. You can see that we applied the CSS style to the body tag. And you can also change the color using CSS to white. And just as another example, query selector, h1, style, border, 10px solid red. So what I just did, I selected the h1 tag from JavaScript, and I used the style property and applied the border CSS with a value of 10 pixels solid red. And let's refresh the page, and you will see that this time we used JavaScript to apply CSS border to the h1 tag. So if you can rewrite this to paragraph tag, and refresh, you'll see that now we're applying it to this tag. So this works as a regular CSS selector. Now I'm going to remove all this and show you another example. So in JavaScript and CSS, you can select HTML elements by their tag name, which is what we did in the previous example. But let's say you have an ID assigned to the body tag and make up some kind of a name. So when you add an ID attribute to pretty much any element, you assign that ID to that HTML element. And that means you can now select it in JavaScript by using this ID instead of just the tag name. So again, we're going to create a variable, body, or anything else. And we're going to use the query selector function again. But this time, I'm going to use the ID something. And when you use query selector with the CSS selector to select by ID, you have to use the hashtag and then followed by the name. So this will select the body tag and place it into body variable. And now we can use this variable to also apply style, background yellow. You can also select elements by class name. And class is also another important attribute name in HTML. Some of them will be IDs when you want to select an individual block of HTML or an individual element. But other elements will have a class. And a class basically is something that's applied through many different elements. If you have an H1 with class nothing and P element with class nothing, if you have something defined in CSS using this name, those styles will be applied to both of them. But here I'm only going to demonstrate how to select by class name. And basically its syntax is the same as what we have here, except instead of the hashtag, we're going to use a dot selector. And so header, and here we're going to do dot nothing, and that will select this element. And now we can use the header variable name because now this object is stored in this variable. Style, background, orange, red. Refresh, and you can see that we applied orange, red background to our title element. But this time it was selected using the dot selector for classes. And this one used the hashtag for selecting by ID. In this part of this HTML crash course, I'm going to show you how to build basic layouts with HTML. You start your layout inside the body tag, and usually layouts are created using a bunch of div tags. So a div tag is only just like a blocking area of space. It's really just a box with some content here. So if I refresh the page, you will see that really all it does is block out a part of our HTML document for some specific purpose, like title, or you can say article, title, content, and let's say footer. Let's put in copy 2027. As you can see, there's really not much done visually on the screen. All we did is divide our HTML document into multiple parts. You can continue nesting your content, like let's say div here. There's another div, and there's another div here for left side, another div here for right side. These div tags don't have any visual effect other than they just block things out and divide our content into separate parts of our site. So every time you create a div, you're actually creating a box that follows the rules of something called CSS box model. And CSS box model includes margin, border, padding, and then the content itself. So that's included with every div that you create. The only thing now is that how do you actually change those properties? How do you apply a border or rounded corners or padding to all of these divs? Well, in order to do that, one of the ways of doing that is you can create a style tag and specify CSS here that will affect all of these tags in different ways. So there's hundreds and hundreds of CSS properties and values. What you basically do is use a selector, and in this case we're going to select the div tags, like all of them, not just one. And if you want to apply specific CSS to that div, you'll want to use a CSS property, like let's say border 10px solid blue, and I'll refresh the page, and you'll see that it created a border against every single div that we created earlier. You can change, let's say, from 10px to 5px, and it's going to create a slightly smaller border. Padding is controlled by the padding property. So if you add, let's say, 20px, which is pixels, you'll have something like this. So this CSS allows you to control the visuals of your elements. And at the very basic, that's really how you build out your site. You create a structure first, and then you use the CSS to style them into whatever you want. So for example, if you want to apply rounded corners to all of the divs, there's a property called border radius. And let's say apply 10 pixels and refresh the page, and you'll see all of the elements were applied a rounded corner. Now margin 10px, and you'll see that now it's looking more like a website or a mobile app perhaps. Now later on you'll probably want to use, like, by the way, you can type CSS directly into each tag, and let's say you change it to display flex, refresh, and you will see that these parts actually aligned more properly. Now I'm not going to go into all of the CSS properties in this tutorial, probably not even any of them, because again, I always wanted to keep this tutorial just limited to the basic of HTML. But in my future CSS crash courses, I will definitely cover these layout techniques in much more detail. Now, the only other thing you should probably know about HTML at this point is the semantic tags, which came to us with HTML5. So in the old days, what you would do is you would design your site using div tags, and that was totally normal and acceptable. And it still is. You're still allowed to build your site using divs. There's nothing wrong with that. But to be compliant with more modern HTML, which is HTML5, we have something called the semantic tags. And it's really the same thing. Nothing is really changing about your layout. The difference is that HTML5 provides more specific elements to divide your site into boxes, and that basically makes your elements more meaningful. So for example, divs become section. So we can apply a section here and here, because these are the three main sections of our layout that we created. And if you refresh the page, you will see that it's changed slightly, because the reason for that is that we're not applying this CSS to the section tag anymore. And if you want to add the section tag, you use the CSS selector with a comma, and basically now we're applying it to the divs and to the section tag. Refresh the page, and we're back to that layout. So really, the only thing that changed here is that we changed the divs to the section, and that's really the idea behind semantic HTML. Now, semantic HTML tags also have a whole bunch of other elements. So you can add things like, let's say, the navigation bar. There's a special tag called nav, navigation. The footer actually becomes the footer tag. And this section can become main. And again, some of the CSS will disappear because we're no longer applying it here. But the basic idea is that there's instead of using a div everywhere, HTML5 provides a set of semantic tags, which kind of communicate to a search engine about what those actual parts of the site are.